I grew up in a church, and as a counselor, I want to give you two concepts and one solution to bring you closer to God if that's what your goal is to do. So the biggest thing that we struggle with today is trying to get closer to God. Sometimes with some of the craziest stuff that's going on in the world, we don't know exactly how to feel close to God when negative things are going on. Like, some people say that Trump got into presidency and that's a really bad thing. But if we look at history and we look at the Bible, for example, you see that there's always been times where there's been leaders that no one really liked and things like that. So we're just repeating something that's happened time and time again in history. But the biggest thing I want to talk about as the first concept that stops us from getting close to God is trauma. So trauma, as defined in the mental health sense, is a lot of times the lack of control or feeling the lack of control. And when it comes to, the religious sense, it comes to getting close to God, you have a lot of trauma that came from the history of the church. You have Catholicism, where you have a lot of older men in powerful positions taking advantage of little girls and little boys, unfortunately. And that creates trauma because you feel like when you put your kid or you put yourself in that environment, you are at risk of something, or you're bringing your family into something that may put them in a bad position. And that's because you feel like you have a lack of control. And obviously that's a real fear. That's not something that's made up. That's not something that we don't have proof of. It's been proof of this happening in the church. I mean, let's be honest. The church was used to justify some of the most horrible things in the world. Slavery, a lot of different things were twisted, and different versions of the Bible were made in order to make you believe certain things. And ultimately, I can see how that history will bring someone away from God. But understand one concept when it comes to building a relationship with God is that the world that we have been put in, we're all given free choice. And just because someone bad or in history has tainted something because of their own greedy, personal, negative vendettas, it doesn't mean that you have to turn your back from God completely. And that's the first concept that really kind of hinders us when we try to get closer to God, because of what have happened in religion, not because of God, because God has been consistent over time and has told you the limitless or timeless wisdom that you can use to even navigate the world today. But the second concept I want to get into that has really kind of shifted most people away from the church itself, or from religion or God or whatever, specifically God, is the cult-like attitudes. And I don't just mean the attitudes of people who are specifically in a religious cult, because those are real things. I mean, if you look back to the hippie movement, there were a lot of hippie cults going on where you had people that thought they were messiahs. They were leaders who wanted to bring people into their world to do the things that they wanted them to do. People have committed horrible acts over time because of these cult-like followings in the name of God per se. But not just that, but cults are essentially a body of people who believe in the same thing and shun anything that is against what they believe in. And truly, I mean, that's not what God specifically does. Unfortunately, the world has complicated the reality of who God is, what exactly he has to offer you in your life, because of the wrong teachings and the wrong doings of other people. Just because people are doing things that you don't necessarily agree with doesn't mean that you have to shun them. But in a cult, it makes it feel that way. And some of the biggest businesses, the biggest churches or organizations, they operate like that. They operate as if you don't believe what they believe and don't do what they say you should do, then you're out of there. But that's not the whole message of God. And unfortunately, because of false teachings and how people act, you might think that's the case, which is not. And I have that in my own family. You got people in my family where they're a part of one religion where in the church, they have a huge control over the people and what they choose to do and who they choose to interact with outside of the church with family members. Specifically, the religion I'm talking about, I believe, is Jehovah's Witness. So I don't want to put anything out there about them. I could be wrong, but that's what I believe the religion is called. And they will specifically tell you to cut off family members that don't do the things that they think you should do in the church. Like, those are cults. That's religion. That is not God. Understand that. If a man is coming to you and telling you something that should be done in the name of God, then ultimately you need to use your discernment, which you gain by getting closer to God. And that's really leading me down to the solution part of things. The solution is ultimately, okay, how do I get closer to God despite the wrongdoings in history, you know, the wrong things that people have actually done? And how do I get closer despite the false teachings, the cult-like behavior of people who say that you do this or you leave, or, you know, destroying families? How do I get close to God regardless of those two things? And the answer is quite simple, to be honest with you. The reality is that the only way you get closer to God is by reading the biblical text, the Bible. For me, it's the Bible. I'm learning different things and growing in my faith, so I'm not necessarily sure if people would consider it wrong to encourage people to read their own text, like the Quran or whatever religious text you're reading. But what I will say is that based on statistics, less than 1/3 of people who claim to be religious have read the entire Bible all the way through. And the crazy thing about that is that people to this day say that they're religious and have not read the Bible all the way through. So you have a man, somebody who is flawed, someone who is imperfect, telling you the beliefs that you should believe based on what they read, not what you read, not the discernment that you had when you read a text so that you can live your life according to what's actually said in that book. And unfortunately, you have a ton of people misleading others because they read a book a certain way based on their own biases, their own trauma, their own past beliefs that are limiting you in your life because you won't sit down and take the time to read. You won't take the time to actually get closer to the God you're supposed to serve. And you know, this is a religious kind of video, I guess, quote unquote, because I am a Christian, you know, although I don't really like the whole idea of a lot of worldly religions. But ultimately, as a Christian, I know that I get closer to God through studying his word to show myself approved. I don't get closer to God by listening to a man tell me exactly what that word said and me just believe him. Because my relationship with God is personal. It's not about what a pastor says or a deacon says or the Pope says. I don't care what any of those people say because my relationship with God is personal. And if you're not willing to get closer to God by taking the action of reading that book, you will always be at the will of somebody else who's telling you something or doing something and telling you that that's right when you haven't even read the own book that you claim to follow. And I would say majority of people I meet, and statistics prove it, majority of people you will meet who call themselves religious haven't even read that religious book they claim to follow. So if you want to get closer to God, don't worry about religion. Once you read that book and you build your personal following, you can get closer to God and you'll have better discernment, better decision making when connecting with people who actually follow what's said in that book. And you'll find people that you trust to actually have studied with and actually bounce ideas off of and kind of discern the word together. So maybe there is something you're struggling with in there that you can talk to someone you trust after you've read it to figure out what's the right thing for you to do. So I'm in Chicago, it's warming up, end of February, and I hope that this video served you. If you guys are into faith, fitness, finances, and just overall personal growth, join my community down below. Subscribe to my newsletter, that's free. And I hope you have a blessed rest of your day and that you continue to get closer to God, not religion.